One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases, and it's the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Inflammation Nation podcast. And wow, we're really winding down to the end of 2022 now. 2023 is looming right around the corner. And I want to pose a question, and that is, what is it that you really want for 2023 as it relates to your health and your wellness, of course? I want to talk about, as we transition through the end of the year, I want to talk about being kind to yourself. And that might mean different things to different people. For example, we might have one person A, let's say, who is metabolically stable, doesn't have many flare-ups. And if they do, it's easy to recover from that. It doesn't take them too long or much effort. You maybe have person B, who's the opposite. They're metabolically unstable. They're either flared up all the time or quite frequently. And when they get flared up, it takes them forever to recover, and it's a lot of work. And those represent, let's say, two different ends of the spectrum of people who have some chronic health challenges, including but not exclusive to things like autoimmunity. So if you're like the second person B, the one who's flared up all the time, and it takes forever to get back to normal, whatever that normal might mean for you, being kind to yourself at the end of the year means not cheating on your diet. It means not overextending yourself during the holiday season. And it means sticking to what you know works for you. But if you're like the first person A, the one who is stable without a lot of flare-ups, being kind to yourself might mean that you have some wiggle room to deviate from your plan, whether that's a strategically planned diet oopsie, or maybe saying yes to a function or a family gathering that you would otherwise say no to because it might push your limits just a little bit. But here's the deal. The way that you are kind to yourself is not so much about the mistakes that you might make that could bring on a flare-up, but in the aftermath of a flare-up, not beating yourself up for having stepped off your path or deviated from your plan. Because honestly, the stress and the negative self-talk of having goofed up might actually be worse than whatever mistake or whatever cheat or deviation that you had made. And so being kind to yourself is, like most things, it's contextual. Now, as a practitioner who guides people through their individual journeys, say back to wellness. It kind of sounds like a slogan, right? Back to wellness. I'm not going to talk to everybody the same way during this holiday season. The goal for everyone is to be able to navigate the holidays with all of its ups and downs, with its positive stressors, sometimes negative stressors, with all the busyness that comes with the holidays, without throwing yourself into a tizzy that takes the first few weeks of January to recover from and to stabilize. I remember a client that I worked with from many years ago who was on a strict gluten-free diet, which was a huge part actually of her success. And she had some major mood and anxiety issues, which all but resolved when she went gluten-free. Her case was obviously more complex than that, but going gluten-free was a big win for her. Now, by the time that Christmas came around during the year that we were working together, she told me that she wanted me to test her for gluten sensitivity, which I told her wasn't a good idea. And the reason that it wasn't a good idea was twofold. First, in order to have an accurate gluten sensitivity test, you have to be eating gluten for the test to be accurate and reliable. And yes, there might be some times when some people can do that and get away with it, meaning eating gluten just for the purpose of a test to see if you're still reactive to gluten. But that wasn't her, which brings me to the second reason why it wasn't a good idea for her to do that. It turned out that her mood and anxiety issues were not just a simple gluten reaction affecting how the brain works. It was that she had neurological autoimmune reactivity. And gluten was a major trigger, not just for her general inflammatory state. Obviously, that's not good for the brain. Plus, it was a potent trigger for her neurological autoimmunity, meaning that when she ate gluten, not only did she get inflamed, but it spurred her autoimmune reaction to a higher level. And she would suffer the consequence with alterations in mood and anxiety. So again, I explained to her that this wasn't a good idea because of what was at stake for her. She was relatively healthy, had good control of her triggers, and maybe she didn't have autoimmunity. Maybe her complaints were maybe just fatigue or maybe some joint pain, but it wasn't all that severe. Then maybe we could do that, eat some gluten, run a test, and kind of get away without having to pay a hefty price. But in her case, I told her no. I said, you really, really shouldn't do that. Well, she explained to me why she wanted to do it. It turns out that, she and her mother had this family tradition of baking specific Christmas cookies every year. I believe it was like an old family recipe. So there was a lot of heart and emotion involved in this. And her mother was ill, unfortunately. They weren't sure how long she was going to be around. They didn't know if they were going to get another Christmas with her, that she could do this with her mother and honor this family and tradition. And so you can imagine I'm sitting there with my heartstrings are being pulled left and right, and I'm struggling between wanting to say yes because of the emotionality and the nostalgia, but thinking it's still not a very good idea. Like there was this real struggle between my clinical mind and someone who was a guardian of her health, for lack of a better way to say it, and just being a person and having a heart. Well, I went through my reasoning one more time just to make sure that she knew that this was risky. And I asked her to weigh the costs and the benefits. And I asked her if it was worth it for her to do that with her mom when the potential cost was a return of her depression and anxiety, which had in the beginning been very, very debilitating for her, like to the point where her family was falling apart and so on. She said yes. She said she was willing to risk it. Number one, because she had been feeling so good. And as often happens, when you cut things out of your diet and you get to the point where you feel good consistently, you start thinking, well, I can go back and I do these things, and maybe it won't affect me to the same degree. Well, she said she was willing to risk it, so I set up the test, and I told her to eat gluten, but only to eat it 2 times within a couple of days of each other. And then in 2 weeks, we would run the test. Why 2 weeks? Well, because if you've been gluten-free for a while, and you eat gluten again, specifically for the rationale of running a test, it takes about 2 weeks for the antibodies to gluten to peak. And so that's the time frame when you maximize the accuracy of the testing. Well, she ate the gluten. The test was positive, which we knew it was, at least I knew it would be. And so she started to feel off again, which is what I had warned her about. Yet when Christmas came, she didn't heed my advice and maybe change the family tradition. I asked her, can you convince your mom to bake with gluten-free bread? And she said, no, that's not going to work. So Christmas came, she baked the cookies, she ate the cookies, and she ate more than just the cookies over the holiday season. And then she started to spiral out of control, and everything that we had worked for and gained during the prior 6 months or 8 months had evaporated. We tried to stabilize her like in the new year, and nothing worked, like not even the things that we had done before that had been successful. And after exhausting every avenue that I could think of through January and February, she finally admitted to me that she was still eating gluten this entire time. And of course she felt ashamed. And at that point she stopped returning my calls. She just dropped off the face of the earth, so to speak. Well, a few months later, now we were probably in April or May, if I remember correctly. And I get this angry phone call from her husband accusing me of all sorts of things, right? Because his wife was so bad, it was worse than when we had started. And, nothing I had done helped her, and they had wasted their time and their money and so on and so on. And to be honest, it was so bad, I couldn't get a word in edgewise. And at one point I just simply put the phone down on my desk and I let him rant until he paused to take a breath. And I grabbed the phone and I said, you do know that she hasn't returned my calls for months and that she's still eating gluten, right? And then there was silence for 20 seconds or so, followed by a very humble voice that said, I am so sorry. And he quite sincerely apologized for going off on me because he didn't know. Now, listen, this story, which is a true story, is not about the potential evils of gluten, although that message is in there. The story is about counting the cost. It's about really asking yourself what you want. And if you're in the middle of some kind of a health recovery program, whether you're working with a functional medicine practitioner, whether you're trying to figure stuff out on your own, either through your own research or by doing, maybe you're doing some of the do-it-yourself programs that I've got on my website. It's about counting the cost, really asking yourself what's important to you and what you want for 2023. And is giving in to the pressures of the holidays worth the risk of losing ground that might take weeks or more to recover from? And is it worth the risk of really destabilizing your system just for the fleeting joy of a couple of weeks that will come and go? Listen, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve, they happen every year. I promise you that they will come around again a year down the road. And so if you're in the place right now where you're flared up all or most of the time, if you have gained some semblance of stability and control over your health, no matter how you have done it, do you want to start the new year behind the 8 ball? Or is it better to deny yourself some fleeting pleasure in the short term to gain the upper hand on the challenges that 2023 inevitably will bring? One of the wonderful things that happens to most people, when they finally figure out what's wrong with them and finally figure out how to fix it, or maybe they found someone to help them, one of the things that happens is that you build your resilience and your reserves, often to the point that you can take a hit or two and stay standing and not get knocked back or not get knocked down. And if you feel like you don't have the resilience and the reserves that you need, then don't risk the flare-up. Just let it go. If you don't have that buffer to protect you from the diet oopsie or the gluten hit or the alcohol hit or from the stress and the busyness of the holidays, then just say no, because there will be another year. The new you of 2023 will thank you for it on January 1st when you wake up not having lost any ground. In fact, I will tell you that for a lot of my clients, particularly those who have autoimmune issues, and particularly those who are still somewhat unstable as the holidays approach, I strongly encourage them to stick to their plan. But other people can deviate. Everyone's different. Context is everything. And listen, I get it. Sometimes the holidays, they bring special circumstances. And I understand that sometimes the holidays are not happy times for people. Not for everybody, I mean. For the most part, they are. But, my wife and I lost my mother and my mother-in-law within 6 weeks of each other, both to cancer of different kinds, in 2020, right before the holiday season began. And so as joyous as this time is, there's a tinge of sadness for Kathy and I that would be easy to slip into, to give over to, and to let that control your choices because you're trying to soothe yourself. I get it. Now, I know that both of our mothers would prefer us to celebrate our happy memories than get in the doldrums, celebrate their lives, and not do the things that are harmful to our health. Let me end on this note. When you're tired, when you're sick, when you're flared up, when you're stressed, this is the time that you're most vulnerable to making the wrong choices and to giving in to your old programming, like the old way of doing things. But there's a very small gap. Again, when you're not well, there's a very small gap between some kind of a trigger that would spur you on to do something that you know you shouldn't. Let's just use diet oopsies as an example. There's a small gap between a stressor or something else that says, hey, go grab that treat, go do this, when you know you shouldn't. So there's a small gap again between the trigger and your reaction to the trigger. Sometimes the gap is so small that you don't know what you're doing until you kind of realize, like, you might find yourself sitting on a couch looking down and you realize, oh my gosh, the entire tub of ice cream is empty. Or you might go, crap, I just ate that whole pizza. And then comes the negative self-talk and the self-recrimination and that all too familiar mantra of, why did I do that? How could I have done that? I know I shouldn't be doing that. And then you start wondering, like, why is it I'm stuck in all these ways? Well, I'm telling you, it's because your reserves are eroded. You don't have that buffer. You don't have the resilience, and you don't have a gap between a stimulus or a trigger and your response. But listen, and listen to me now. Be kind to yourself. If you do make a mistake, if you find yourself sitting in the middle of a room with an empty pizza box or ice cream tub, if you make a mistake, shrug it off and move on. Because it's done and it's over with. You might have to deal with the aftermath, but don't get into the negative self-talk, because that in and of itself is a potent trigger for dysregulated metabolic health. Get back to your plan and make the next choice the right choice. Just let it go. And here's what you need to know. When you get healthier, not only do you build your resilience and your reserves, you start to increase that gap between the trigger and your response. And all you need is a slight opening, a little widening of that gap, so that when the trigger comes that makes you want to cheat, that you don't do it reflexively and automatically and then kind of wonder afterwards what happened. You have a brief moment where you can stop and you can ask yourself, do I really want to do this? And quite often, in fact, I had this conversation with a client just recently. I said, anytime you feel that trigger and you're in the gap between the trigger that says, I want to go cheat, and actually doing it, walk away for 5 minutes, go do something else. Go outside, call a friend, do some exercise, do something healthy, and then come back 5 minutes later and say, do I still want to do it? And if you do, then by all means, but shrug it off and get back to your plan. And as you practice that pause, as you kind of live in the gap between trigger and automatic response, and you start to realize that you have control and you can make the right choice in the gap, as that gap widens and you practice the pause, you will start to gain victory over those old habits that probably got you in trouble in the first place. And isn't that inevitably what happens? When we cheat, we do the things that were problematic from the get-go. And what was a struggle before suddenly isn't a struggle anymore, because you've changed your programming. The reason why it's so easy to fall back into old habits when you're stressed or tired or overextended is because you practiced that for so long. And it's embedded in your subconscious as a program that executes on its own with very, very little friction and nothing to oppose it until you practice something new and something different. You act differently, you think differently, because you've changed your programming. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Now, stay tuned for a special Christmas episode, which will be coming out in a couple of days. If you want more information about functional medicine, about me, you can check out the website, drnoseworthy.com. You can find me on all of the major social media channels, and the links are in the episode descriptions. Please remember to follow the episode and then comment and rate and like and share it, because it helps others to find the information that they need to begin their own healing journey. All right, guys, 2022 is almost at an end. We'll see you on the next episode of the Inflammation Nation.